Its name alone struck fear into the hearts of competitors with names like Ferrari and Porsche. It's the spiritual successor to the Shelby Cobra, and it's downright one of the coolest cars ever made. I'm a bit biased. By the end of its run, the track-focused ACR version was so fast that it actually holds the record for most records held at racetracks around the US for a production car. Or at least it did in 2016, I don't really know. And it's a car that probably shouldn't exist. Like, by all accounts, the Chrysler Group shouldn't have built it. So come along with me on this very strange journey to find out just how unlikely it was that Dodge, of all companies, would create one of the greatest supercar slayers ever made. And how it became one of the fastest production cars in the world. Let's kick it into overdrive with the Dodge Viper. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's the early 1970s, and for enthusiasts lucky enough to be driving back then, horsepower figures were way up because fuel costs were way down. But in 1973, everything changed due to this little thing called the oil crisis. And that's bad news because Dodge was known for two things: huge, powerful engines, and even bigger, huge, powerful engines. And the bad news didn't stop there. For a variety of reasons we won't get into in this video, Chrysler just wasn't really making money anymore. Between the rising sun of Japan and rivals Ford and General Motors becoming more and more dominant, Dodge didn't even have the money to start building the smaller, more fuel-efficient cars people were flocking to. The company was floundering, and because they couldn't afford to do any R&D, they cranked out some pretty miserable cars. Now, they imported and sold some rebadged Mitsubishis, but those never really caught on. But then, in 1979, like a knight in shining armor, a dude named Lee Iacocca, the creator of the Ford Mustang, got fed up with the leadership at Ford. Again, a video for another time, but basically he and old man Ford just never really got along. So he left the Blue Oval and took over as director of the entire Chrysler Corporation. See, he had a vision: build incredibly cheap, fuel-efficient cars that anyone could buy. So he begged the government to bail out the Chrysler Group. They did, and Dodge out the K-car to the world. The cars sold like crazy and saved Dodge from bankruptcy. Now profitable again, in a stroke of genius, Iacocca took the cash they were making selling K-cars and doubled down on an all-new idea: the minivan. With a slew of K-cars and minivans flying off their lots faster than the boys at the factory could screw them together, the Chrysler Group seemed unstoppable. It seemed like finally, with a strong showing of good cars, trucks, and vans in their lineup, the company had everything they needed to take down GM and Ford. President of Chrysler Bob Lutz, though, never forgot his muscle car roots. And in 1988, high on all the success the company had been having, he got together with chief designer Tom GALE and conveyed to him his dream of building a modern-day Shelby Cobra. Unbeknownst to the rest of upper management, there was a grassroots Skunk Works project firing up behind closed doors. It was happening after hours and off the clock. A group of hot rodders inside the company had gotten together under the watchful eye of Roy SJOBERG and gotten to work on what they thought would become the world's ultimate sports car. Team Viper was born. It consisted of 85 engineers, some eggheads from Lamborghini, and $70 million. Oh, and some input from Iacocca's old friend and colleague, Mr. Carroll Shelby. Cobra, Viper. The team would answer directly to Lutz himself. No focus groups or legal advisors even knew the car existed. And when Chrysler rolled the concept car into the room at the 1989 Detroit Auto Show, it absolutely stopped the entire car world in its tracks. It looked like nothing else the world had ever seen. Remember, when Chrysler launched this, cars you could actually buy looked like this. Response to the car was so positive that, combined with hundreds of orders for a car being placed that wasn't even approved for production, and a quick blast he took in the prototype around the Chrysler Proving Grounds, it took all of 30 minutes for Iacocca to greenlight Project Viper. Sprinkle in an all-new aluminum V10 co-developed with Lamborghini, and in 1991, leading the Indy 500 with Shelby himself behind the wheel, the Dodge Viper exploded onto the world stage. People couldn't get enough of it. Every single Viper produced was to be handmade right here in the good old US of A. And at the start of production, demand was so high, Hollywood elitists were trying to bribe Lutz to cut in line and take delivery of their Viper before everyone else. The first-gen Viper had no windows, no exterior door handles, would burn all the skin off your leg if you weren't careful getting out, and was about as safe and friendly as a game of Russian roulette.
Let's play a little Russian roulette.
The huge 8-liter V10 was mounted behind the front axle, making it a front midship car, sticking the block next to your knee and the transmission directly next to your hip. You literally sit next to it. That didn't leave much room for your feet, so they kind of sit off to the left. You get used to it. You're literally cocooned in drivetrain. You've got an engine and gearbox on one side, the exhaust on the other, and those massive tires just inches away from your spine. So good thing it had AC, right? It didn't. It wasn't even an option until 1994. If you want to know about what it's like to drive one across the country through lightning and hailstorms and nearly one incident of being arrested, check this out here. Basically, it's a bucket list experience for a car guy. Even when it's not running on all 10 cylinders, it still kind of wants to kill you. It has no safety, no traction control, no ABS, no roof. Nothing. There's even a sticker in the door jamb warning you that the sport hoop behind your head is in fact not a roll bar, so keep the rubber side down. Honestly, it's a miracle it even has seat belts, really. It's just 400 horsepower. An earth-moving 465 foot-pounds of torque, a manual gearbox, massive 335 tires out back, wrapped in a lightweight resin transfer molded body, and some suspension parts that were shared with the Dodge Dakota. Now the Viper was going to be powered by a V8, but Dodge was developing an awesome new V10 for their trucks, and the idea of a 10-cylinder powered car was pretty exciting. The only other V10s around at the time were found in Formula 1 cars, but the truck engine was designed to be, well, used in a heavy-duty pickup doing pickup truck things, and remain ridiculously durable, which meant heavy. Too heavy, in fact, for a sports car. Luckily, Chief of Engine Design Richard Winkles had just returned from a stint over at sister company Lamborghini, who, yes, believe it or not, Chrysler actually owned at the time. And he'd learned that the boys at Lambo knew a thing or two about building high-performance, lightweight engines with more than your average amount of cylinders. Their powers combined and together developed a totally new engine that was an absolute powerhouse. Nothing from the truck design, aside from the bore, stroke, and V-angle, was carried over. It was an odd-firing, huge displacement, and to the dismay of Lambo's engineers, pushrod packing monster that was bolted to a frame with a couple seats. And it made enough low-end torque to throw you into a tree backwards if you so much as sneezed at the wrong time. If that all sounds like your idea of a good time, well, first gens are going up in price. Like, you could find them for $30,000, now 40 grand is more like it. And that means get one now and make money driving your dream car. If you want something a little more livable, the Gen 2 Viper at least wouldn't set your legs on fire as easily. And it had airbags. In 1996, the Gen 2 was introduced the same way the Gen 1 was. As a pace car for the Indy 500, it made 50 more horsepower, had air conditioning standard, power windows and locks, better brakes and suspension. Later versions even got ABS. Unfortunately, due to the new noise emission standards, gone were the signature exhaust pipes. Even though the exhaust still runs through the sills, but retained was the Viper's no-nonsense, hardcore performance and attitude. And because it's just frankly a pretty badass car, it was heavily featured in video games like Gran Turismo, Test Drive, and Need for Speed. Because starting in '96, the Viper started racing and placing. Like the RT10 was a tribute to the original Cobra, the GTS paid homage to the Cobra Daytona. This second generation car would also introduce us to three of the best letters in racing history. ACR, which means American Club Racing, because that's what it was built to do. It dominated races like Le Mans and Daytona. And if you wanted a true factory prepped bona fide race car, well, Dodge decided they'd build you that too with the insane Viper GT SR. This second gen Snake was just straight up one of the fastest cars you could buy for the money. And they still are, actually. A sorted second gen Viper, as long as you don't need an ACR, will set you back like 50 to 60 grand. They're probably the most sought after out of the entire Viper lineage and have been slowly climbing in value. And if you do need the ACR, well, good luck, my friend. They're out there, but prices are at an all-time high, with low mileage good examples now selling far beyond the original sticker price. After the second gen, there was, you guessed it, the third gen. Now there wasn't a huge difference mechanically between the Gen 2 and the new in 2003 Gen 3 because get this, Dodge was in financial chaos again, and was bought by Mercedes-Benz, who basically took what was going to be the super hot Gen 3 ACR and developed it into what ultimately became the Mercedes-Benz SLS. Bet you didn't know that. Once again, if Dodge wanted to build another Viper, they'd have to find a way to do it on a budget. The Gen 3 did have a bigger engine and made another 50 horsepower, bringing it up to 505 friggin' horses with the return of the awesome side dump exhausts. Like the first gen, it was originally only offered as a roadster, but for the first time, the top stayed with the car and could simply be raised and lowered. It even got push-button start. But because of the Dodge turmoil and the fact that they just straight up didn't build them in 2007, the Gen 3, like all Vipers, is actually pretty rare, with just over 6,000 of this generation snake ever made. However, since its styling is a little obscure, it might actually be your best value, since they're about the same price as that second gen, but you get the extra horsepower and, take it from me, frankly a better car. Plus, like all Vipers, they're rising in value. Something about how there will probably never be a gasoline-powered car like it ever built again, or something? Anyway, after skipping a year and dragging their feet, in 2008, the Viper was back. And Dodge, well, they decided to bump things up a notch to 600 horsepower with the Gen 4 Viper. The Gen 4 Viper blasted onto the scene with the first of its kind cam-in-cam variable valve timing, never before possible with a pushrod engine. The car got a ton of aero improvements, some vents, and a revised 6-speed transmission. The ACR returned in 2010. It set the lap record at the Nürburgring. And poof, the Viper was gone again. 4th gen Vipers are even more rare than 3rd gens, which means they're more expensive. Think like 80 grand for a GTS, and in the neighborhood of 120 grand or more for an ACR. And that's if you can find one. The thing is, it's sort of like the bastard middle child of Vipers. It looks basically the same as the last gen, but it's missing some of the extra insanity and creature comforts that the 5th gen offered, meaning that the prices are actually staying pretty flat. Check out the graph. Compared to other generations, the 4th gen just is not quite getting the love. Not yet. The Viper was destined to shed its skin and evolve one last time before it cemented itself in history as one of the greatest supercars that America would ever make. It happened in 2012, the final generation of Viper, produced by the now Fiat-owned Dodge, would once again step up and dominate the motorsport world. The 1st gen Viper was a 60s sports car reimagined in the 90s. Huge engine, no safety. The 2012 Viper, well, was not all that different from the 1st gen, except that instead of a wimpy 400 horsepower, it now made 645 horses. And would hit speeds of over 200 miles an hour. And it was technically safer. These last generation Vipers performed much better in crash testing and had a race-tuned traction and stability control system with multiple different modes. A new ultra lightweight and ridiculously stiff chassis, optional adaptive suspension, and some truly awesome brakes. It got some interior materials and styling pulled right from Dodge's new stepsister Ferrari and used an all-new digital instrument cluster, proving that the Viper had finally grown up a little. Don't let that fool you. It's still just as venomous. And the last generation, more than any other Viper in history, completely owned motorsports. I'm talking 13 track records, thanks in part to a completely redesigned, highly aerodynamic lightweight body that, if I'm honest, still looks just like the original. And that's super rare. And absolutely gorgeous. If you want one though, prepare to pay more than what they were sold for new. Right now, a GTS is over $130,000 and rising. An ACR, because you deserve over 1,000 pounds of downforce and one of the fastest production cars ever built, try $200,000. And that's a good deal, because there certainly won't be any more made. In 2017, Dodge killed the Viper again, probably for good. Sales of the Viper were down, and when safety standards changed and started requiring side curtain airbags, it would have required completely re-engineering the car's roof, windshield, and doors to make it happen. Fiat Chrysler just couldn't justify the cost of keeping their lost leader Halo car around, and decided once and for all to cut the head off the legendary snake. And while it's certainly not the first time the Viper has been canceled before coming back, we're in the age of the electric and hybrid supercars now. There isn't going to be another horribly unsafe front-engine, rear-drive, high-horsepower monster like the Viper probably ever again. I'm super thankful I've got to drive one, and sincerely hope you all get the chance. It was a car built by car people for car people. They knew even back then the car probably wouldn't really be profitable. See, that wasn't the point. The Viper was built as a celebration of the automobile and driving, an absolute underdog from an unsuspecting company that shook the world. It's fast, ridiculously fun, and loud in more ways than one. And in the words of Jeremy Clarkson, who I think put it best, it's as stupid and as wonderful as owning a pet elephant. And it's one of my absolute favorite cars ever made, which is why I own one. So what about you? Do you love the Viper, or is it kind of not your thing? How'd you first learn about it? I'm genuinely curious because everyone seems to have a different story. Was it a poster in an auto shop? Gran Turismo? Your dad telling you his dream of owning one? Let me know in the comments down below. Anyway, this is Trav. Please like the video if you liked the video, and most importantly, keep on living that ideal lifestyle. We'll see you next time.